The one thing that I didn't mention yesterday, I didn't ask, but what time frame am I talking about when I'm talking about Reconstruction? Because that was the one thing I didn't
As a
remember.
year?
You want the date?
1860. 1870, 1870, like, but they cut it off like 1876 during that election.
Exactly.
It's supposed to have ended there.
Right. And one thing I do in my classroom is I always say I will never test you on dates to my students because I don't think, I mean, I'm awful at dates. I always have to look them up. And I tell my students that. But I think the historical content of the time frame is important. So after Reconstruction, after the horrors that we talked about yesterday with Reconstruction, into the idea of how to reunify this nation. So 1865 to 1877 would be the time frame that we're talking about with the election. And so one of the things that I just want to do is go through this quickly, but I want you to kind of think in your mind, no matter what discipline you teach, from art to social studies to anything else, where could you include your own discipline within this broader time frame? So when I talk about Reconstruction, and I think if you're doing anything historically from the Civil War, I can even argue up through Vietnam. The Civil War death rate, the Civil War hangs on American history and American consciousness. I think I can say up through the 1960s and 70s that it is such a part of American memory. And I always emphasize to my students the death rate and the death toll. And so I oftentimes open up a discussion of Reconstruction by, I mean, I hate to say there's thousands of pictures on in National Congress on the bodies, either if they're posed or if they're actual images. And just to re-emphasize, 500,000 men just in the service have died, and outside of Tennessee and Ohio, all over the place. And so, what does that do to a national consciousness? And then I always talk about, okay, the guys who aren't dead, they're coming home with so many variety of stresses that they don't even have a diagnosis for at that time. We would call it PTSD. They didn't know what it was. And so we talk about this change. And so again, interdisciplinary, you could deal with this in terms of psychology, in terms of difference in gender roles, in terms of history. There's also numerous examples of, again, I don't like death, but I like studying death. The monuments, the tombstones, the image, the architect that was used to honor and to memorialize this sense of death within the national consciousness. Monuments are an excellent example of how to also use that within the classroom. And then I always talk about in terms of the changes, and you could do any of these type of maps talking about where the slave states were, the different numbers, and again, focus on that change in society, going from a slave nation to freedom. And again, literature, tremendous amount of literature, poetry, anything of those would be useful to have students appreciate what this transformation entailed. And then, I love this image. You probably can't. And again, I'll have this up on the website if you ever have an opportunity. I use this a lot in both my survey classes and my Jim Crow classes, and also when I teach women and gender, because it shows. Remember, I told you yesterday, I always talk about the excitement of Reconstruction, and then I'll let y'all down with a crash. This is the excitement part, and just wonderful images, and you can get this off the website in terms of what slavery was, the ideal of freedom, and then the sense of family. And you could do a variety of different assignments with your students just from that one source. And then again, I do a lot of these broad images in my classroom. When I talk about Reconstruction, I always talk about the ideal and then the reality. The ideal was that sense of freedom, and then the reality, if you actually are going on into this time period, is the rise of racism. And again, this is an image I use a lot in a variety of my classes because it talks, you can talk about in terms of politics, you can talk about in terms of race relations, and just some of the images that they have. I probably would only use this with older students. This is not something you could use with younger students. Because obviously, if you're talking about Reconstruction, dealing with older students, you would talk about lynching. And if that's something you're interested in, I would say, like, definitely just high school, maybe 12th graders. Even some of my own students, my adult students, when I talk about lynching, and I have a Without Sanctuary website that I show them, I always have to put the caveat that if you're uncomfortable with this, you're more than welcome to go outside. Because it is very uncomfortable in terms of some of the images, not from this site, but another site that I use. But again, you can use these images, and you can probably even use this, but just, how you present it within the classroom. I think middle school students could take it, but it would be dependent on your presentations. And you can actually, let me go back up. You could probably actually just stop there, in terms of a Reconstruction class, and you could just put in everything you would need in terms of Reconstruction just based on those two images.
When my kids are adults now, but they learned about it in elementary school. So I'm a little uncomfortable with not showing what happened.
Not this image, I think you could, but there's another website, I probably spoke through it too quickly, called Without Sanctuary. I don't know. It's a website that has lynching postcards that were made during this time period. And have you used it?
I've used it with 8th grade students.
And they've been okay.
And yeah, I mean, kids are really savvy.
Okay.
And the amount of desensitization that's happened as a result of video games, it's part of the Indiana State Standards for 8th grade. We go all the way through Reconstruction. You have to do slavery, and the stuff that is most profound, that touches them most deeply, is when they are looking at an image that I've scaffolded so that they understand that this didn't happen just one night, some guy got up and did this. They understand that this was, this started in 1604 with the importation of slaves to this country, and that when you don't talk about it, they really, in my opinion, my students feel like they've been lied to. If all of a sudden they get to high school and they come back and they're like, but it happened, we did that with you, but you didn't say a thing about it.
I mean, I always believe in presenting it,
Yeah,
but
you
I'm
have to be
just
sensitive,
shocked
that's
that the Without Sanctuary website, because I've had adult students in my class, because I teach adult classes, that they've had to leave because maybe older people aren't as desensitized. That might be it.
I think that might be true.
Maybe with the adult students, it touches too close to home.
Most of the time we try to sanitize that, but I remember the young man, he was a teenager, Emmett Till. He was killed in the Deep South, and one thing his mother said, she said, I want an open casket. I want people to see this young man, what had happened to him. And I think today when you have men about teenagers and gangs and being killed and things like that, it could be a reality check that you're not vulnerable. You are vulnerable to things happening in the world around you. So she made a statement she wanted to have an open casket so they could see her son, who was what, 13, 14 years old, something like that. So I'm surprised that most adults can't take that.
And again, I can show you some of the images from the Without Sanctuary website, because some of those images are profound. You see decapitation, you see arms, you see burning bodies, etc. And again, many of my, especially older students, are majority first generation, African American, and it touches something in them that they have a hard time looking. And again, I can show you that site. Again, that's not it, but
I'm gonna make a statement. But did that happen during the Holocaust, that the people need to come to grips with what was happening? In Germany, they needed to see the concentration camps. They needed to see what was going on so they get a realization and say, well, I didn't know that was going on. I did not know that was happening in Germany.
100%. I believe that it should be shown. I believe it should be talked about. I mean, that's what my classes are all about. I just don't know in terms of primary grade levels how, again, I deal with college and adults. The only thing I know about little kids are moms, and they scare me. I walked into a kindergarten class and all these little kids were all around me and I was just running out terrified. And I totally agree when you were saying about the trenches idea. So that's all I'm saying. I don't know. You all have the knowledge in terms of how to incorporate these images for that type of student population. Yes, I think you and then.
Well, I had done thing on Holocaust literature for young people, so it's over the same thing. You're always balancing the appropriateness for a certain age level without traumatizing them, but yet still not lying to them.
Right.
The truth with this. So addressing the issue is not necessarily the same thing as what particular material you use to address the issue, depending on the age you're teaching, and that's a judgment call on the teacher.
Exactly.
And knowing your students and those particular ones.
So I think 100%, I want every single college student that comes into my class to know that during Reconstruction, thousands of freed men and women were killed. Now, how you all do that, you all know that much better than I do.
I totally agree with what you said. One of the vehicles that I use to judge how much to tell, or even if I should tell, I happen to be one of these people that I just don't like to look at those images. So I can't look at images of war very well, anywhere, doesn't matter who it is. And so, number one, I appreciate that you said that you allow your participants in your class, if this upsets you in any way, you may leave. Because I had a PD at my school, because we have a large population of immigrants from Burma and surrounding countries that had experienced some atrocities. And the presenter, in good faith, was trying to broaden our awareness of our population that we were teaching. And in doing so, she presented some horrific imagery. And I got up and walked out. And one of my colleagues thought that I was being disrespectful. And so I had to explain to her, well, first of all, I can't look at anything where children are being traumatized. Just can't even look at it. Don't even want to hear about it hardly. And then to just have it put in my face without warning, that was just too much for me, and I couldn't deal with it. I say that, like you said, the children need to be told the truth, because after all, children weren't spared those experiences.
No, and if you see the
Babies
image,
weren't spared those experiences.
it's a dead baby.
And even today in our societies, children are not spared these horrible experiences. So you have to let them know, but it is upon that person, upon that teacher, to decide how to do it, but you have to let them know.
And I think that was a good thing, kind of knowing the class, because I know, now, believe me, my students still have to answer questions on their essay and everything like that in content. They're not, they still have to do that part. But it's the same thing when I show Vietnam War films or things like that. I have many students who are Iraq veterans or Afghanistan veterans, that if they feel the need to leave the class because of the experience, they still need to know the content.
Right.
But they always have that option.
I want to point out that this is art manipulating your minds. The fact is that the artist selected the way he was going to present this idea. And when the artist decides I was going to present the idea, you look at it, and if you don't put those two beside each other, then what it tends to do is go straight to your brain, straight to your emotions, without you having some sort of intellectual defense against it. And that's the point I'm making about manipulation, that art manipulates us. And these manipulate us. Every bit of art that you see tends to bypass that critical aspect of your brain.
And I'm manipulating you all because I put this PowerPoint slide together. You look at, you know, historical magazines or newspapers at that time, these two pictures weren't together at the same time. No. I do it because I want to make the point to my students that when you look at Reconstruction as a whole, these are the ideologies, these are the images that historians find as you look at the actual historical content.
See, I would find that that's the real lesson here, by having them together, because you're showing the contrast, and as a teacher, I feel responsible to the student to teach them what I think is important, not just what's on their standard. So if that image speaks to me and it's haunting and it's upsetting, then I have a responsibility to share that with my students and get them through it.
Right.
I also have I was an art therapist for 20 years. So for me, it's important that we don't hide our eyes, that we do find what's age appropriate. But when my children grew up in 6th grade, they went to Washington, D.C. to the Holocaust Memorial. That's 6th grade and they're already adults. So you may have to find out what these young kids know. I mean, they have no trouble killing people in their video games.
Right, that's why I said I leave it up to you all.
So why not teach them what really happened? And if we're the teachers that are the adults that are with them the most prevalent time in their lives, then we have to tell them what's the truth.
Right.
And we even talked about the history books not having enough information, Rosa Parks and things we talked about at lunch, that we know that's our duty as a teacher.
And that's why, you know, I think in terms of age appropriateness, I can give you the content, but how you introduce it into your classrooms. I mean, I grew up a long, long time ago where I probably would not have seen some of those images in the classroom just because of that time period. One more, then I'll show you the other things.
What is your name? Dr.
Joe Mullins.
Mullins, okay. One of the things that, I love to sit back and wait for him to stand up. Let's hear the hard side of all this.
Alicia, we all do.
Yeah, because that is what, that's my responsibility I feel, as the art teacher, to say, yada, yada. Now, for the art part of this, one of the things that we're supposed to teach our children, one of the standards is the purposes of art. And this is the perfect example of the communicative properties and qualities of art. The power of art as a tool of communication and as a tool of whatever kind of change or whatever kind of emotion that you want to elicit. And yesterday, when you were talking about, this picture is not George Washington, it is a representation of, it is not, and how art is nothing more than, I may be paraphrasing wrong, but I got out of it that, and I've always said this anyway, it's the greatest illusion in the world. It's illusion.
Showbiz.
It is. I love it. It's showbiz. And so that's what as the art teacher, I'm supposed to teach them. I feel first. Then I can bring in these other social studies and all that kind of stuff. I can bring that all in because it certainly is a part of it. But my real purpose is, number one, to teach them, first of all, to make art and to enjoy the process of making it, to make it, to just get in there and stick your fingers in it and get it's physical, it's active, it's a verb, you do it, and then you can talk about it.
And I think one of the things you said is very powerful is that how I would link something like this in the classroom would be maybe show some of these images, you know, talk about the power of persuasion, you know, what is it saying, how is it influencing people, and then connect that to primary documents, to letters written by maybe ex-slaves looking in terms of freedom, or letters written by Klan members, or people who have been participating in the Klan, and their sense of how they want to see the country reborn on the space of racism. Or letters by African Americans in the South who are fearing what the nation has become. And so you could see both the power of the image and then link that to individuals into their own writings. I've done that many times in my class, and it's been a very very fruitful discussion. So that's how I introduce it. I will not go through all the PowerPoint because this goes a long, long way. And again, this will be on the website. But after again, I always want people to feel things. And so initially, I open up my Reconstruction discussion with this, again, linking it maybe to some primary sources, etc. And then I go into just, the historical part. We talk about the 13th Amendment, what it says, and all aspects of it. And then we go into how white Southerners reacted to the end of slavery, and I do a lot of primary source assignments with this. I don't know if anyone had a chance to read the Jordan Anderson letter, but I introduced that at this point, and it really shows that interesting reaction of freedmen to their ex-owners. And then I go into presidential politics, looking at Andrew Johnson. I always call him one of the ones that wanted to be part of a clique, the Mean Girl clique. And kind of get a little bit of his psychology and, how he wanted to be part of the.
We noticed that was a sexist comment back here.
But isn't there a book, the movie, The Mean Girls?
Queen Bee's and Wannabes.
Am I right or?
Yeah, Mean Girls is a movie and Queen Bee's and Wannabes.
Yeah, I knew there was some movie that I'm so bad about popular culture. My students laugh at me because I'm like either history or like iCarly. I haven't, gone. I need a teen. Once my kids are teenagers, I'll be cool again. But I'm not cool yet. But really wanting to be part of that in-group, and we talk about the psychology of that and why his Reconstruction policy ended up the way it was. And then his different attitudes. And we go into his Reconstruction policy, which basically said, say you're sorry, everybody can come back to the Union again, we'll all be friends, and everything will be wonderful. Then I get into a lot of this, we get into the Reconstruction policy, and then this would be a really good place to use the veteran in the field, because what I always tell my students is that imagine you had been fighting in the war on the Union side, I always say from Indiana, and all of a sudden you hear that former Confederates are now back into political office and nothing has changed. How to respond to that. And so we then go into images, more images, and this is a really good one that, I should remember which was that. I think this was out of Harper's Weekly, where many Northern Republicans are arguing we need something more than this. And so the idea that, we had slavery, but we still have it. Nothing has changed. And so we do a lot with this image itself. Then we go into congressional Reconstruction. You might have heard of it when you were maybe as radical Reconstruction, if anyone's. Most historians have kind of gone away from that radical part to focus on congressional, because many argue that freedom and equality shouldn't be radical, it should be what was needed. And so we go into all that. We get into the 14th Amendment, and I spend like 2 days on this, and students can recite it by the end. The one thing I make students do also is that they have to read the Constitution in my class. And I'm always surprised that they haven't read it before, or they're not saying that they have. And I'm saying that totally facetiously. Totally
Put that on my
facetiously.
reading list.
And so we deal a lot with the 14th Amendment, and then we go into Reconstruction Acts, and then we get into the 15th Amendment, and again, I talk about this not only in terms of Reconstruction, but in terms of gender. Why are women not allowed to vote, in 1870? Why do we have to wait so long before we have the right to vote? And so we do a lot with the 15th Amendment. So as you'd see with Reconstruction, there's so many things that you can build on as you go into future lessons.